Dizzy was, you know, so outgoing. You know, he was a well, I mean, he was a wonderful personality, and in his own way, he was like a bebop edition of Louis, you know. And first time I saw him was due to a very pretty girl that I had met. Actually, she actually picked me up in a way. I was with another girl, and she apparently, for some reason or other, liked what she saw in me. I don't know, but in any way, that's how I got to meet her. And she was pretty hip, and this is again early in my New York days. And she was the first one to take me to Harlem. She took me to the Apollo and to see Dizzy's big band, and I will forever be grateful to her for that, because this was the stage where Dizzy had Chano Pozo. So I fortunately got to see that, and I'll never forget it. I mean, the band was great, but the Pozo was something else, and they had this number written by George Russell that featured Chano, called Cubano B, Cubano Bop, and it was a whole show that involved Chano Pozo, who, as you know, did not live too much longer after that, because he was killed in some stupid encounter that had to do with drugs, and, you know, some guy just pulled out a thing and shot him. So I was lucky that I got to see him, but it was a real show, because what they did was they put the house lights down for that, and Pozo had been, you know, playing with the band, but then he came out sort of stripped to the waist with some kind of interesting pair of pants, and with how they got by with that on stage, I don't know. A lamp, you know, one of those things with a flame on it, and he heated up the skins of his of a big drum that he carried there, and he had a whole array of stuff, and then he'd sit down and he started to chant, as he does on the, it was recorded, and there's a live recording of it too. He would start chanting in Cuban style, and then, you know, played like it in the band. I mean, it was a tremendous performance, and I'm just, you know, I'm delighted that I got to witness that. So that was my first encounter with Diz, but then, of course, on the, you know, on the scene and everything, Dizzy was so easy to, you know, to get to know. He was very friendly and very open, and we became friendly too, and saw him in the many different circumstances, and must say that he was the most consistent. I mean, he never seemed to have an off day, off night, and the way he played, you know, the way he mastered that instrument, he, you know, he had his own approach. He had the puffed cheeks, which you were not supposed to have. You know, a trumpet teacher will tell you, you know, you can't, don't puff your cheeks. That's where he stored all that air, because he could play those tremendous runs. Nobody else has been able to do that, that speed and in such a long, you know, flow. Well, I saw Dizzy recording sessions, and one was for, with Benny Carter was the musical director, it was for that film. Was it The Man Called Adam or something? It was for a film. And he was always, you know, in the studio, very relaxed, and he could come up with some funny stuff. And he was an easy person to work with for producers and for bandmates. And of course, musically, there were moments of, you know, where you could really get an insight into how brilliant he was harmonically and rhythmically. And he would, at one session, he would go over to the piano and demonstrate something. He was a good piano player. And, you know, terrific score. But he was fun. I mean, I went to, there was a Carnegie Hall thing, and I wanted to see him. I went backstage. I mean, at that time I had press passes and all that stuff. I went backstage and I was in Dizzy's dressing room. And they were smoking a joint, so the Carnegie Hall backstage was fine. I can talk about that now because it's legal now, for Christ's sakes, you know. So. But anyway, it was always, you know, happy. I had Dizzy here when I was with Downbeat or whatever. I forget, what was it for? Oh, yeah, it was doing a preface for my first book, I guess, for jazz people or whatever. So I interviewed him, you know. He, you know, not interviewed, but I taped him for what he was going to say. And among other things, he mentioned Miles there. He said about a lot of people don't understand Miles because basically he said Miles is a shy person, so he comes out like that. Anyway, what happened that my son, firstborn son, Adam, was still very little. He would have been just about a year, less than a year, maybe. He was still a babe in arms, you know, so Dizzy was interested in him. He would always say, oh, you know, great, you know, baby. So he picked him up, and there we have a photo of it. He picked him up and held him, but unfortunately, Adam did not smile, but he started to cry. That was a little disappointing. Dizzy, I remember one night I was late, early in the morning, you know, the jazz hours. I was walking with some musician friends. There was a trumpet player who was carrying a trumpet under his arm. And all of a sudden, this was on Columbus Circle, you know, we walk around. A car came around, you know, and somebody yelled, musicians, and it was Dizzy. He was in the car. He wasn't driving. It was the driver. So he waved and yelled, musicians. I never did a formal interview with Diz, but I did a thing about his then quintet. I talked to all those. There was really good, a very young Kenny Barron, and Dizzy put Kenny on the map. He was, I think he wasn't 20 yet, but terrific. And who else was it? Chris White was the bass player, and good drummer whose name I have. And Moody, you know. Moody is somebody, we got to talk about Moody too. What a beautiful man. Anyway, this was a really good band, and it was always nice to see Diz. I was at a recording session, and he recorded with Benny Carter. It's called The King, I think. It's, yeah. So that was interesting. They gelled beautifully, and Dizzy was, obviously he had been a sideman with Benny in a small band that Benny had in New York, and when Dizzy was still, Left Cab Calloway. So, I mean, they were hardly strangers, but Dizzy really, you know, you could tell how much he respected Benny, and that's just everybody with Benny, you know. But it was great, too, what he played, you know. He was so, yeah, it was such a brilliant musician. It's just, it was sad to see at the end, he went on too long, you know. With that style of his, any decline in, you know, your ability to execute and stuff would really be noticeable. And to get back to Benny Carter, we were talking about that, and Benny said he's a prisoner of his technique, you know. And that was exactly what was the case, because he just simply, at that late stage, he couldn't stop doing what was so much part of him in his playing, you know, and just relax and start playing long tones and stuff instead of run. So, yeah, but it was, the last time I saw him was at a club downtown, and I must confess that after one set, you know, I'd been planning to stay, but after one set, I left. I said good night. I have to be somewhere, you know, I have to go, because it was painful, and you can tell that from the very last records he did. No, I mean, he still personally, one thing, he still was Dizzy, but that was gone. So he was special. And his relationship with Louis, I'll tell you what, Louis, that they were neighbors in Queens for quite a while. And Louis told me, he said, he was very fond of Dizzy. There's an early photograph, you know, you had all this bullshit, stupid stuff going on in the jazz press with Moldy Figs and beboppers and all this stuff, you know. Musicians were, you know, above that, really, unless they were prodded by some press agent or something to do with it. So Dizzy and Louis were really friendly, and you can see that even there's a photograph early on from, you know, from like around 1944, 45, of Dizzy and somebody else. Maybe it's Joe Thomas, another trumpet player, visiting Louis backstage, and you can tell from the expression on their faces, you know, the expression on Dizzy's face, it's the same thing that happens to all of us when we were around Louis, you know. So Louis told me, he said, you know, he said, we were talking about Dizzy a little bit, but he says, Dizzy, he comes around sometimes late at night to raid my ice box because his wife doesn't have anything. So he comes to my house to get something to eat out of it late at night. So when they had the tribute to Louis at Newport, and they had all the trumpet players, and Dizzy was the one who said, "Without him, no me." That was a great way to put it. That meant more than some long, you know, cascade of words. You know, that was perfect. And as he was a very brilliant guy.